the fact that the European Union is recognizing nuclear power in that way means that the tide has turned in terms of perception. And so that means growth in the sector, which means more demand.
Hello and welcome to the Assay. Today, to speak on what's happening in the uranium markets, we have Warren Gilman, Chairman, CEO, and Director of Queen's Road Capital. So Warren, thanks for being with us here today.
Thanks, Amy. My pleasure, and a well-timed discussion given all the activity in the uranium market in the last couple of weeks and the coming months.
Absolutely. And I suppose going on with, what's happening right now, there's been a lot of unrest in Kazakhstan right now. That's been kind of taking over the news quite a bit. So I wanted to ask you, what is the impact that you're seeing on uranium and the uranium markets overall?
Well, looking back, Amy, the impact to date on uranium prices has been surprisingly, if not shockingly, muted. Spot prices have gone from, call it $42 a pound to $45 a pound. I think spot closed yesterday at $45.75. So let's say it's moved $3 or $4 a pound. So less than 10%. And let's put this in context. These numbers are thrown around, but I think people lose the impact of it. If there were guns blazing in Riyadh or Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, or if someone had invaded Kuwait again, the oil price would be well over $100 a barrel, screaming towards 150, and there'd be no end of leverage on the equities, the oil equities. OPEC or Saudi Arabia is 14% of the world's oil supply, 14. Now, we've had a foreign power come in to Kazakhstan, and guns were blazing on the streets of Almaty. Kazakhstan accounts for, everyone quotes 40%. It's probably closer to 50% given the current shutdowns in North America. 50% of the world's current production of uranium. So 3 or 4 times the impact of a Saudi Arabia on the oil market. And yet oil or uranium price has moved less than 10%. So it's probably really a reflection of the fact that uranium is still followed by a relatively narrow group of investors, which outlines potential or underlines potential for the future, and also shows how misunderstood the market remains. The fact that we have this unrest in Kazakhstan, unrest which has certainly in the short term been curtailed, but not solved. So this will be an ongoing problem under the current situation. And yet uranium prices effectively aren't reacting, and if anything are now reverting back to the mean, if you will, or reverting back to where we were pre the uprising. So as I say, surprising if not shocking.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting. What about impacts on mine supply? I mean, have there been significant shutdowns?
And this is the other side of the coin, which people will argue, which is there has not been any impact on mine supply, and any impact we see going forward will be relatively minor. Obviously, there's infrastructure and supply issues which won't affect production but might affect delivery. either delivery of the yellow cake out of Kazakhstan or delivery of supplies into the mining operations, which will longer term potentially impact production. But unless there's a major uprising, we don't anticipate impact on mine supply. But the impact is not on mine supply. The impact is on investor appreciation of the risk going forward. And if you're a utility, who do you want to supply going forward? It underlines the fact that supply out of North America and Australia is certainly a lot more reliable than supply out of Kazakhstan. And that might, and how do I, what do I mean by reliable? Well, that reliability may not be that they won't deliver to you, but given the tensions between the US and the Russian sphere, which we're well aware of with a potential shooting war mooted to happen in the Ukraine, if you're a US utility and the average US utility currently buys 50% of their uranium from either Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, or Russia, but largely Kazakhstan, obviously. What is the possibility that in coming months or years, US sanctions will be, just as we're currently sanctioning the supply of potash out of Belarus, US will sanction the supply of uranium out of Kazakhstan because it's under the influence and has the presence of Russian troops on the ground in the country. And what if you are a utility and you get 50% of your supply from Kazakhstan? Are you willing to put at risk keeping the lights on in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York City, Cincinnati, given the potential risk of sanction to Kazakhstan? Or is it a heck of a lot easier just to get your supply from North America? And I think in the current round of recontracting, you're going to see a lot of utilities make that move. Perhaps it's a move that they should have made 5 years ago, but the current actions in Kazakhstan will reinforce that. So even though there won't be an impact on mine supply, there should, and I believe there will be, an impact on the purchase of that supply. Interesting.
So I guess following on from that, do you see further investor interest in and I suppose production coming up in North America or other markets?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The flow-on ramification of what I've just said is that what's happened in Kazakhstan will continue to benefit the North American producers, both the US and Canada. So you're going to see increased demand from utilities for their production, potentially even more financing flexibility from them in terms of financing development of new, more secure North American sources of production. And that's going to flow through to share prices for those companies. So I think the impact is good, positive for North American companies, and we're going to see both increasing share prices and more interest from both retail and institutional investors in North America as the fragility of supply of this critical input is realized.
Okay. I'm going to come back to that retail investor idea a little bit later, but I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit to talk about kind of the future energy mix, the green transition that the industry is currently going through. And so uranium's been kind of in the news quite a bit as we turn away from fossil fuels, and people are realizing a little bit more the kind of the cleaner aspects of nuclear. So what sort of role do you see for uranium in the future energy mix? As you know, a lot of the talk right now is on batteries, hydrogen, uranium, all of those. Where do you see uranium fitting in?
Yeah, and it's interesting, Amy, that this is unfolding just as we had expected. We made our first investment in the uranium sector, I think it was 2016, with the concept that, you know, the green aspects of nuclear energy as being, you know, a non-carbon generating source of reliable long-term base load energy. That's incredibly valuable. You see the value of that every day. I was reading a Bloomberg article this morning about it's been an unusually non-windy winter in Europe. And guess what? When the wind doesn't blow, the turbines don't turn.
Yeah,
it's just not reliable. One might also argue the green aspects of it in terms of the inputs required to construct those turbines. But at the end of the day, the one thing that nuclear is reliable, and the other thing it certainly is non-carbon generating. And in this environment, and the direction the world is going, that is absolutely not just necessary, it's critical. And so the naysayers on nuclear energy have obviously been proven wrong in the short term. What I see in the long term is actual growth in the sector. Now, that growth, we all know, has been recently dominated by Asia, and in particular China, where everyone knows the number 150 new reactors between now and 2050 are being either currently constructed or planned. 150, that's a huge number. But now that we've seen the European Union include in its first draft of taxonomy in the first week of January, nuclear as being recognized as a green source of energy, and therefore able to be funded by the European Union with financial assistance. We will, in all likelihood, now see growth in the nuclear industry in all of Europe. That's huge. That's a huge game changer, not just in terms of the impact on future uranium demand, but just mindset. Just the fact that the European Union is recognizing nuclear power in that way means that the tide has turned in terms of perception. And so that means growth in the sector, which means more demand.
Absolutely. What about some countries? Like, I thought that Germany, amongst others, were still quite opposed to nuclear.
Yeah, and you're quite right. Within the European Union, there are countries that have decided to remain non-nuclear. Germany being the most vocal proponent of that. Obviously, you have France at the other end of the scale, proposing growth in their nuclear sector. And there will always be those who are more or less supportive of nuclear. But what we're starting to hear out of the discussions currently going on in Europe is that Germany will not oppose this proposal by the greater European Union. So that even though Germany may decide at this point in time, and given Germany's woes in terms of energy costs within Germany, I would not be surprised at all. In fact, I would expect that over time, Germany will likely change their view, but they've already started to change their view in that it is quite possible that they won't oppose this initiative within the greater European Union, of which they are a critical member, obviously. And that will lead to growth in nuclear generation within Europe. And as I said, I expect ultimately Germany will come to that realization as well once they see the benefits accruing to the rest of Europe in terms of both meeting their obligations in terms of climate change, while simultaneously reducing the cost of their energy and increasing the reliability of that energy. It's a bit of a no-brainer in terms of logic from my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier, when we were talking about the green transition, we're speaking a little bit more about kind of more investors getting involved in this space. Do you see more space opening up for retail investors in the uranium markets? And I suppose how so?
Yeah, I think without question that, as I said right off the top, the impact of Kazakhstan brought to surface the fact that the uranium investment community is still relatively small, and it's a subset. It's a small subset of investors in the mining sector, which is a tiny subset of the global investor universe.
Yeah.
That is about to change, with nuclear being viewed as part of the global carbon reduction solution. You're going to go from a subset of a subset to strong interest from generalist investors across the globe, and in particular, strong interest in from a new generation of investors who are perhaps more active and more climate conscious than the older generation. And that's going to make a huge difference in the sector. Huge difference.
Great. And I suppose to wrap things up, any predictions for long-term investment appetite? I suppose looking forward, where do you see the market heading?
Well, it's with these global trends, I think it's very easy to see uranium prices double where they are now in 5 years. The fact of the matter is that demand is growing, will continue to grow, and yet the mine deficit continues to grow along with it. There are simply no new mines under construction, even though the price has gone from $20 a pound to $50 a pound. When prices go to $100 a pound, the nature of the uranium industry is highly regulated. It takes 10 years to bring a new mine into production. So even though there'll be huge financial motivation when uranium prices are $100, it's going to be there for another 10 years before you see new supply coming on stream. So the upside is there, and increased uranium price coupled with greater investor awareness, combine that with a bias of capital to move away from Kazakh supply towards North American supply, and you can see yourself building to a perfect storm with respect to equity prices for North American uranium developers. So it's a pretty good backdrop. And the first week of January was, I think, a game changer to put everything in perspective, both from the news on the European taxonomy and the uprising in Kazakhstan has just re-emphasized what potential there is.
Sounds great. Well, certainly a lot to look forward. Keep watching out for as we move forward.
Well,
so
Uranium was the first investment that Queens Road made. And given the success of those investments, we have our portfolio is dominated by uranium. And so, I'm pretty comfortable right now that Queens Road shareholders are going to do well through this period.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much for your input today. It was great catching up with you.
Thanks, Amy.